The sun dipped low over the skyline of Crestwood, casting a golden glow across the sprawling parking lot of a bustling quick-bite restaurant. To the untrained eye, it was a picture of success: cars lined up at the drive-thru, customers streaming in and out, and the neon sign flickering with a promise of fast, delicious food. But beneath the surface, something was rotting. Julian Carter, the CEO of Quick Bite, leaned against the hood of his rented sedan, staring at the scene. His company had grown from a single food truck into a regional chain of 15 locations in under a decade. On paper, it was a triumph. Sales were steady, profits were climbing, and expansion plans loomed on the horizon. Yet, the numbers didn't tell the whole story. Lately, Julian had been haunted by a growing unease. Customer reviews, once glowing with praise, had begun to sour. Complaints about cold food, curt staff, and chaotic service were piling up on social media and in emailed feedback forms. Employees were quitting faster than HR could hire replacements, and turnover rates had spiked to alarming levels. Julian had built Quick Bite on a promise: good food, served fast, by people who cared. But somewhere along the way, that promise had frayed. Sitting in his sleek downtown office, surrounded by spreadsheets and boardroom chatter, he'd lost touch with the heartbeat of his own creation. Today, that was going to change. Julian adjusted the frayed denim jacket he'd dug out of a thrift store bin that morning. Gone were the tailored suits and polished loafers that defined his CEO persona. In their place were scuffed sneakers, a faded t-shirt, and a worn baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. A scruffy beard, grown over weeks of intentional neglect, completed the disguise. He didn't look like Julian Carter, the visionary entrepreneur featured in business magazines. He looked like an average guy, maybe a delivery driver or a construction worker grabbing a quick bite. That was the point. For the first time in years, he was stepping into one of his stores not as the boss, but as a nobody. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. The air hit him with a familiar mix of grease and spices, but the vibe was off. The dining area was half full, with a few customers picking at their meals in silence while others tapped their feet impatiently at the counter. Behind the register stood a young woman, her name tag reading Lila. She was in her mid-20s, with dark circles under her eyes and a tense set to her jaw. Her Quick Bite polo was wrinkled, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun that looked like it hadn't been redone in days. "Welcome to Quick Bite," she said, her voice flat and mechanical, barely glancing up from the screen. "Hey," Julian replied, keeping his tone casual. "Can I get a chicken sandwich combo, spicy, with a side of fries?" Lila punched the order into the register with robotic precision. "That's $7.49, she muttered. Julian handed her a crumpled $10 bill, watching as her fingers hesitated over the cash drawer. Before she could count out his change, a sharp voice cut through the air from the kitchen. "Lila. What's the holdup? You're moving like you've got cement in your shoes." Julian's head turned toward the sound. A man in a manager's vest, his name tag reading Todd, strode out from the back, his face flushed with irritation. He was in his early 40s, with a stocky build and a permanent scowl etched into his features. Lila flinched visibly, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the coins. "Sorry, Todd," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "Sorry doesn't get orders out faster," Todd snapped, crossing his arms. "You're lucky I don't send you packing right now." "I've got half a mind to." He stopped short, noticing Julian watching from the other side of the counter. For a split second, his expression shifted, smoothing into a forced grin. "Hey, man, don't mind her. She's new. Takes a while to get the hang of things." He chuckled, but it sounded hollow. Julian raised an eyebrow, keeping his face neutral. "No worries," he said, taking the change Lila slid across the counter. Her eyes flicked up to meet his for a fleeting moment, pleading, exhausted, before she turned away to grab his order. Julian stepped aside, his stomach twisting. Todd's tone wasn't just harsh, it was degrading. And the way Lila shrank under it told him this wasn't a one-off. As he waited, Julian scanned the restaurant. The tables were streaked with ketchup and crumbs, a trash can in the corner overflowed with wrappers, and a teenage boy mopped the floor with the enthusiasm of a sleepwalker. 2 other employees lingered near the fry station, scrolling on their phones while a line of drive-through orders blinked red on the screen. Lila, meanwhile, darted between tasks, handing out bags, wiping down the counter, refilling the soda machine, all while Todd barked commands from the sidelines. Lila, fries are up. Move it. You're killing us here. The final blow came when a customer, a middle-aged woman with a toddler in tow, approached the counter, her voice tight with frustration. I've been waiting 15 minutes for my order. This is ridiculous. Lila froze, clutching a tray. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'll check on it right now. She turned toward the kitchen, but Todd intercepted her, his voice loud enough to turn heads. What did you mess up now, Lila? Can't you do anything right? He snatched the receipt from her hand, scanning it with a sneer. Figures. You didn't even put it in the system properly. Useless. The woman at the counter sighed, exasperated, while her toddler began to whimper. Lila's face flushed crimson, and she bent her head, muttering apologies as she scrambled to fix the mistake. Julian's hands clenched at his sides. He'd seen enough. This wasn't just poor service, it was a breakdown of dignity. Lila wasn't slacking, she was drowning, and Todd was throwing her an anchor instead of a lifeline. Julian took his food to a corner booth, but he barely touched it. His mind raced. He'd come here expecting to find inefficiencies, maybe a lack of training or outdated equipment. What he found was worse, a culture of contempt. Todd wasn't leading, he was bullying. And Lila, despite the constant berating, was the only one trying to hold the place together. He watched her for another hour, noting how she apologized to customers with genuine remorse, how she stayed late to clean up spills the others ignored, how she bit her lip to keep from crying when Todd's insults grew sharper. As the evening rush slowed, Julian made a decision. He couldn't fix this as a customer. He needed to dig deeper, to see if this was an isolated problem or a symptom of something bigger. He tossed his uneaten fries into the trash and slipped out the door, the weight of what he'd witnessed settling into his chest. Back in his car, he pulled out his phone and texted his assistant, "Cancel my meetings for the next week. I'm going off-grid." This wasn't just about Quick Bite anymore. It was personal. Julian had poured his soul into this company, dreaming of a place where people, employees and customers alike, felt valued. Somewhere along the way, that dream had been hijacked. He didn't know how widespread the damage was, but he was damn sure going to find out. Tomorrow, he'd visit another location. And the next day, another. He'd wear a different disguise, ask different questions, watch with fresh eyes. But one thing was already clear, Lila wasn't the problem. She was a spark, a quiet, battered ember of what Quick Bite could be. And Julian was determined to fan that spark into a flame, no matter what it took. As he drove away, the neon sign faded in his rearview mirror, but the image of Lila's weary determination burned bright in his mind. This was only the beginning. The following morning, Julian Carter woke before dawn, the faint hum of Crestwood streets filtering through his apartment window. Sleep had been elusive, his mind replaying the previous day at Quick Bite, Lila's trembling hands, Todd's venomous words, the apathy of the other employees. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd failed them all. Not just Lila, but every person who clocked in under the Quick Bite banner. Today, he'd take another step toward understanding how deep the rot went. He swapped yesterday's denim jacket for a faded flannel shirt and a pair of work boots he hadn't worn since his food truck days. A battered messenger bag slung over his shoulder completed the look, an unassuming courier, maybe, or a gig worker stopping by for a quick meal. This time, he drove 30 miles out of the city to a quick bite location nestled in a suburban strip mall. The parking lot was quieter here, dotted with minivans and a handful of retirees sipping coffee through the drive-thru. Julian parked at the far end, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The air carried the same greasy warmth, but the energy was different, less chaotic, yet heavier, like a fog had settled over the place. A lone cashier stood behind the counter, a wiry man in his 30s with a name tag reading, Sam. His quick bite polo hung loosely on his frame, and his eyes darted nervously as he greeted Julian. "Hey, welcome to Quick Bite. What can I get you?" "Burger combo, no onions," Julian said, keeping his voice low and casual. Sam nodded, tapping the order into the register with shaky fingers. As Julian handed over a crumpled bill, a woman emerged from the back, short, sharp-eyed, and wearing a manager's vest. Her name tag read Denise. She didn't yell like Todd had, but her presence carried a cold authority that made Sam stiffen. "Sam, you're short on the drawer again," Denise said, her tone clipped as she glanced at the register. "Third time this week. You counting with your eyes closed or what?" Sam's face paled. I swear I'm careful, Denise. It's just busy, Anne." "Excuses don't balance the books," she cut him off, folding her arms. "Fix it before I have to write you up again." She turned away, disappearing into the kitchen, leaving Sam to fumble with the change. He handed Julian a few coins, his hands unsteady, and muttered an apology before turning to the next customer. Julian lingered near the pickup counter, watching. Sam wasn't slow, he moved with a jittery efficiency, juggling orders and wiping down surfaces between tasks. But he was rattled, second-guessing every move as if expecting a reprimand. The kitchen crew, meanwhile, operated in a bubble of their own, two younger employees laughing over a phone while a fryer beeped incessantly in the background. Denise reappeared intermittently, issuing curt commands without looking up from her clipboard. The disconnect was palpable. Sam was drowning out front, the kitchen crew was coasting, and Denise seemed more interested in paperwork than people. Julian took his food to a table near the window, but his attention stayed on Sam. Over the next hour, he saw the cashier handle a spill from an overflowing soda machine, apologize profusely to a customer whose order was delayed, and rush to restock napkins, all without a word of support from Denise or the others. When a man in a suit complained about a missing side of fries, Sam took the brunt of the anger, even though Julian had seen the kitchen crew pack the bag. "I'm sorry, sir, I'll get it right now," Sam said, his voice tight as he darted to fix the mistake. Denise, standing nearby, didn't intervene, just jotted something on her clipboard and walked off. The breaking point came when Sam dropped a stack of trays while trying to clear a table. The clatter echoed through the dining area, drawing annoyed glances from customers. Denise stormed over, her voice low but cutting. "Are you kidding me, Sam? You're a liability. I don't know why I keep you around, probably because no one else wants this shift." Sam bent to pick up the trays, his shoulders hunched. "I'm trying, Denise. I really am." "Try harder," she snapped, then turned on her heel. Julian's chest tightened. It was a different flavor of toxicity than Todd's outright aggression, but no less damaging. Denise didn't yell, she dismantled. Sam wasn't just an employee to her, he was a problem to be managed, a number to be corrected. And like Lila, he was carrying the weight of a failing system on his own. Julian stayed until the lunch rush ebbed, then slipped into the restroom to scribble notes on a scrap of paper he'd tucked into his bag. Sam, overworked, underappreciated. Denise, detached, critical. Crew, disengaged. Culture, fear-driven, not team-driven. He folded the paper and tucked it away, his resolve hardening. One store might have been a fluke, but two. This was a pattern. He needed more data. Over the next 3 days, Julian hit 4 more locations, each time in a new disguise, a hoodie and sunglasses at one, a fake delivery uniform at another. The faces changed, but the story didn't. In a downtown quick bite, he met Aisha, a single mom working the grill, who stayed silent as her manager berated her for a burned batch of nuggets she hadn't even cooked. In a rural outpost, he saw Carlos, a high school kid, juggling drive-through orders while his supervisor scrolled TikTok in the break room. Everywhere, the same threads emerged: overstretched workers, indifferent leaders, and a creeping sense of despair. By Friday, Julian sat in his car outside the suburban store again, staring at the notes he'd compiled. 6 locations, 6 snapshots of a company he barely recognized. He'd built QuickBite to be a place of opportunity, not oppression. How had it drifted so far? Guilt gnawed at him. He'd been too busy chasing growth, too trusting of the managers he'd put in place. But guilt wouldn't fix this. Action would. He decided to test the waters one last time. Back in his flannel disguise, he returned to the suburban quick bite that evening, this time approaching Sam directly. The cashier was wiping down the counter, his movements sluggish after a long shift. "Hey," Julian said, leaning casually against the edge. "Rough day, huh?" Sam glanced up, surprised. "Yeah, you could say that. You hear a lot or something?" "Nah, just passing through," Julian lied. "You seem like you're holding this place together. Manager doesn't give you much credit, though." Sam snorted, a bitter edge to it. "Denise? She's too busy with her reports to notice. Long as the numbers look good, she doesn't care. Most of us just keep our heads down, can't afford to lose the gig." "What if someone higher up knew what was going on?" Julian asked, keeping his tone light. "Would you tell them?" Sam hesitated, then shrugged. "If they'd listen, sure. But corporate doesn't care about us. We're just cogs, you know." Julian nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah. I get it." He thanked Sam and left, the cashier's words echoing in his head. Corporate doesn't care. That was the dagger, because he was corporate, and he hadn't cared enough to see the truth until now. Back home, Julian spread his notes across his kitchen table, a map of dysfunction staring back at him. Lila, Sam, Aisha, Carlos, they weren't cogs. They were the soul of QuickBite, and they were suffocating under leaders who'd forgotten what leadership meant. He couldn't confront Denise or the others yet, not without a plan. But he could start somewhere. He picked up his phone and dialed his HR director, Mia, who answered on the second ring. "Julian? It's late, what's up?" "I've been undercover in the stores," he said, cutting to the chase. "It's bad, Mia. Worse than we thought. I need you to pull every manager's file and set up one-on-one meetings starting Monday. And get me a list of our hardest-working employees, the ones no one's noticing. We're turning this around." Mia paused, then said, "Okay. But this sounds big. You sure you're ready for the fallout?" "I'm not just ready," Julian replied, his voice steady. "I'm done waiting." As he hung up, he looked at the photo on his wall, a grainy shot of him flipping burgers in that first food truck, grinning like the world was his. That guy wouldn't have let this happen. And starting now, neither would he. The Monday morning sun barely crested the horizon as Julian Carter strode into QuickBite's downtown headquarters. His usual polished suit was back, the scruffy disguises of the past week tucked away, but the fire in his chest burned brighter than ever. The office hummed with its typical rhythm, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the faint aroma of coffee wafting through the halls. To his staff, it was business as usual. To Julian, it was the start of a revolution. He'd spent the weekend poring over the notes from his undercover visits, cross-referencing them with the employee files Mia had emailed late Sunday night. Names like Lila, Sam, Aisha, and Carlos now carried weight beyond their name tags. They were the unsung heroes he'd failed to protect. The manager's files painted a different picture. Todd's glowing self-evaluations clashed with customer complaints. Denise's meticulous reports hid a trail of write-ups and resignations. Others showed similar patterns of coasting or cruelty. Julian had trusted these leaders to carry his vision. Instead, they'd built fiefdoms of fear. His first stop was Mia's office. She looked up from her desk, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "You're here early," she said, pushing aside a stack of papers. "I've got the manager meetings lined up, 15 of them, staggered over the next 3 days. And the employee list you asked for is on your desk." "What's the play?" Julian sat across from her, folding his hands. "We're hitting reset, Mia. I've seen what's happening on the ground, good people breaking under bad leadership. I'm meeting every manager face to face to set the standard. No more excuses. And those employees, the ones holding it together, I want them recognized, promoted if they're ready. We start with the suburban store today." Mia nodded, scribbling a note. "Denise's location, right? Sam's there. You mentioned him on the phone." "Yeah," Julian said, his jaw tightening. "Sam's a rock, but Denise is grinding him down. I need to see her reaction when I call her out. If she can't adapt, she's gone." "Bold move," Mia replied, raising an eyebrow. "You're risking a lot of turnover at once." "I'm risking more by doing nothing," Julian shot back. "This isn't just about profits anymore. It's about who we are." By noon, Julian was back in his car, driving to the suburban Quick Bite. He didn't bother with a disguise this time. His suit and tie announced his authority. When he walked in, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Sam, behind the counter, froze mid-order, his eyes widening. The kitchen crew straightened up, their phones vanishing into pockets. Denise emerged from the back, clipboard in hand, her sharp gaze narrowing as she registered Julian's presence. "Mr. Carter," she said, forcing a tight smile. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you." "I'm full of surprises lately," Julian replied, his tone even but firm. "Let's talk in private." In the cramped office, Denise sat stiffly, clutching her clipboard like a shield. Julian didn't waste time. "I've been here before, Denise. Last week, Undercover. I saw how you run this place, Sam scrambling while you nitpick, the crew slacking while you bury yourself in paperwork. That's not leadership. That's neglect." Denise blinked, her composure slipping. I don't know what you mean. My numbers are solid. Sales are up 3% this quarter. Numbers don't tell me Sam's shorted on breaks or that you blame him for every mistake," Julian interrupted. "They don't show me a team that's afraid to speak up. I built Quick Bite on people, not spreadsheets. You're failing them." Her mouth opened, then closed. "I'm doing my job," she said finally, her voice thin. "It's not easy managing this crew. Sam's unreliable. Sam's the only one keeping this store afloat," Julian cut in. "I watched him handle a rush solo while you wrote him up for a spilled tray. That's not unreliability, that's burnout. Your job is to lift him up, not tear him down." Denise shifted, defensive. "I didn't know you were watching. If I'd known." "That's the problem," Julian said, leaning forward. "You shouldn't need me watching to do right by your team. I'm giving you a choice, step up, starting now, or step out. I'll be back in a week to see which you pick." He left her pale and silent, the clipboard trembling in her hands. Out front, Julian caught Sam's eye and motioned him over. "You're doing good work," he said quietly. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Things are changing around here, stick with me." Sam's shoulders relaxed slightly, a flicker of hope crossing his face. Thanks, Mr. Carter. I'll try. Julian nodded and left, the encounter replaying in his mind. Denise wasn't Todd, she wasn't cruel, just disconnected. But that didn't absolve her. Over the next 2 days, he repeated the process at 4 more stores, confronting managers with what he'd seen undercover. Some bristled, like Todd, who doubled down with excuses until Julian fired him on the spot. Others, like a soft-spoken manager named Priya, admitted their shortcomings and asked for guidance. Julian gave them all the same ultimatum: prove you can lead, or leave. By Wednesday night, he was exhausted but energized, back in his office with Mia and a stack of feedback forms from the anonymous system he'd launched. Employees were talking, some cautiously, others with raw honesty. "My manager yells at us in front of customers," one wrote. "I work doubles with no thanks," said another. But there were glimmers of light too: "Sam's the best, he deserves a raise," and "Aisha keeps us sane when the grill breaks." Mia tapped the pile. "You've got a goldmine here. These people want to be heard. What's next?" "Promotions," Julian said, circling names on his employee list. "Sam's interim manager if Denise can't cut it. Lila's getting shift lead at her store, she's earned it. Aisha and Carlos too. And training, mandatory, for everyone. No more sink or swim." Thursday, he returned to the first store, the one where he'd met Lila. She was behind the counter, moving with quiet efficiency, no Todd in sight. When she saw Julian, her eyes widened. "Mr. Carter? What's going on?" "You're what's going on," he said with a small smile. "I was here last week, undercover. Saw how you held this place together. Todd's gone, you're shift lead now, with a raise. Think you can handle it?" Lila's hand flew to her mouth, tears brimming. I don't know what to say." "Yes, I can. Thank you." "Don't thank me," Julian said. "You earned it. Just keep being you." As he drove home that night, the weight of the week settled into something new, not guilt, but purpose. He'd shaken the tree, and the rotten fruit was falling. 5 managers were on probation, 2 were out, and a handful of employees were stepping into roles they'd never been given a chance to try. But this was just the beginning. The real test was sustaining it. Friday morning, he gathered his executive team, Mia, Operations VP Raj, and Marketing Head Claire, in the boardroom. "We're not just fixing stores," he told them, pacing. "We're rebuilding trust. I've been too far from the front lines, we all have. From now on, every leader spends a day a month working a shift. No exceptions. And we're rolling out a reward program, bonuses for employees who go above and beyond, voted by their peers." Raj frowned. "That's a big shift, Julian." "Costs could. Costs go up when we lose people like Lila and Sam," Julian countered. "This isn't negotiable." Claire grinned. "I like it. Shows we're serious. Customers will notice too, happy staff, better vibes." By the meeting's end, the team was on board, brainstorming ways to amplify the changes. Julian left the room lighter, the path ahead clearer. He wasn't done confronting the past week's lessons, but he'd started something unstoppable. That night, he pinned a new photo next to the old food truck shot, Lila and Sam, smiling awkwardly after their promotions. A reminder of why he'd begun, and why he'd never stop. 3 months had passed since Julian Carter's undercover odyssey shook QuickBite to its core. The crisp March air carried a hint of spring as he stood outside the company's training center, a squat building repurposed from an old warehouse on the edge of Crestwood. Today was no ordinary day, it was the first annual QuickBite Leadership Summit, a mandatory gathering for all 15 store managers. The parking lot buzzed with arriving cars, and Julian adjusted his tie, feeling the weight of what he'd set in motion. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a declaration. Inside, the room was packed, folding chairs arranged in tight rows facing a simple podium. Managers chatted in low tones, some clutching coffee cups, others glancing nervously at the blank screen behind Julian. He spotted familiar faces: Denise, who'd barely clung to her job after a probationary overhaul, Priya, now thriving after embracing his feedback, and new interim managers like Sam and Lila, their presence a testament to the shift underway. The air crackled with anticipation, a mix of uncertainty and hope. Julian stepped to the podium, gripping its edges as he scanned the crowd. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady but warm. "Thank you for being here. When I started Quick Bite, it was a dream, a food truck with a line around the block, built on good food and better people. Somewhere along the way, we lost that. I lost that. Today, we take it back." The room fell silent, all eyes on him. He clicked a remote, and the screen lit up with a single word: purpose. "3 months ago, I went undercover in our stores," he continued. "I saw what you couldn't hide: overworked teams, disconnected leaders, a culture that rewarded silence over strength. I saw people like Lila, Sam, Aisha, and Carlos carrying this company on their backs while others looked the other way. That ends now." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Julian pressed on. "This isn't about blame, it's about accountability. Mine first. I got too comfortable up top, trusting reports over reality. But you're accountable too. You set the tone every day. You decide if your team feels valued or invisible. And starting today, we're all in this together." The screen shifted to a list of updates: anonymous feedback system, 90% participation. Leadership training, completed by all managers. Employee satisfaction, up 40%. Turnover, down 25%. Julian let the numbers sink in. "These aren't just stats," he said. "They're proof we can change. But we're not done. I've asked someone to join me up here, someone who showed me what real leadership looks like." He nodded to the back, where Lila stood, smoothing her blazer. She'd been nervous when he'd asked her to speak, but she'd agreed, her quiet resolve unshaken. As she stepped to the podium, the room leaned forward. "Hi," she said, her voice trembling slightly before steadying. "I'm Lila. I was a cashier 3 months ago. I loved my job, but I hated how it felt: rushed, ignored, yelled at. I stayed because I needed it, not because I wanted to." She paused, glancing at Julian, who gave her an encouraging nod. "When Mr. Carter came in undercover, I didn't know it was him. But he saw me, really saw me. Now I'm shift lead, and my store's different. We're a team, not just bodies filling shifts. If I can go from invisible to this, anyone can. It starts with caring, about the work, about each other." The room erupted in applause, and Lila's cheeks flushed as she stepped back. Julian took the podium again, pride swelling in his chest. "Lila's right," he said. "It's about caring. So here's what's next: every manager works a frontline shift monthly, no exceptions. We're launching Quick Heroes, a peer-voted bonus program for standout employees. And I'm opening my door: any of you, anytime, can tell me what's working or what's broken." Denise raised a tentative hand. "Mr. Carter, this is a lot. What if we can't keep up?" "Then we help you," Julian replied firmly. "But if you won't try, you don't belong here. This isn't a suggestion, it's who we are now." The summit stretched into the afternoon: workshops on team building, breakout sessions for managers to swap ideas, even a Q&A where Sam asked, "What if corporate forgets us again?" Julian met his gaze. "I won't. You'll keep me honest." By evening, the energy had shifted, guarded faces softened, conversations buzzed with cautious optimism. As the managers filed out, Julian caught Priya's eye. "You're doing great out there," he told her. She smiled. Thanks to you pushing me. Back at headquarters, Julian sank into his office chair, the day's weight settling in. Mia poked her head in. Summit went well. Social media's lighting up, customers love the quick heroes tease Claire dropped. Good, Julian said, rubbing his eyes. But it's the people inside that matter most. How's the employee list looking? Solid, Mia replied, sliding a tablet across his desk. Sam's killing it as interim manager, Denise stepped up just enough to keep her spot. Lila's store hit record sales last week. Aisha and Carlos are training for supervisor roles. You've got a pipeline of talent now. Julian scrolled through the updates, a grin tugging at his lips. Permanent promotions for Sam and Lila, effective next week. They've proven it. Mia nodded, then hesitated. You're different, you know. Since the undercover thing. More grounded. I had to be, Julian said, leaning back. I almost lost what made QuickBite mine. Never again. The next morning, he visited Lila's store unannounced. The dining area gleamed, the crew moved with purpose, and Lila, now in a manager's vest, coached a new hire with patience Todd never had. Spotting Julian, she waved him over. Mr. Carter. Didn't expect you. Checking in, he said, smiling. How's it feel? Like I belong, Lila replied, her eyes bright. We're not perfect, but we're trying. Customers notice too, tips are up. Permanent manager gig's yours, Julian said. Announcements coming Monday. Lila's jaw dropped. Are you serious? Thank you, I won't let you down. You never have, he said, clapping her shoulder. Later, at Sam's store, Julian found a similar transformation. Sam greeted him with a grin, no trace of the jittery cashier he'd met. Denise is actually listening now, he said, wiping down the counter. Team's tighter. Your summit lit a fire. Permanent manager's yours too, Julian told him. You've earned it. Sam laughed, shaking his head. Never thought I'd hear that. Thanks, man, I mean, Mr. Carter. Call me Julian, he said. We're in this together. Over the next week, Julian crisscrossed the region, dropping in on stores, handing out promotions, and working shifts himself, flipping burgers, ringing up orders, mopping floors. Employees gawked at first, then warmed to it, trading stories over fryers. Customers posted selfies with the CEO who cares, and sales ticked up. But the real win was in the feedback forms. I'm proud to work here now, one read. Someone's finally listening, said another. On March 16, 2025, Julian stood in his office, staring at the wall of photos, his food truck days, Lila and Sam's promotions, a new shot of him in an apron with Aisha and Carlos laughing beside him. The company wasn't perfect, some managers still resisted, and hiccups lingered. But it was alive again, pulsing with the spirit he'd nearly lost. His phone buzzed. Mia. Numbers are in, she said. Profits up 15%, employee retention's at an all-time high. You did it. We did it, Julian corrected. And we're not stopping. He hung up, gazing out at Crestwood's skyline. QuickBite wasn't just a chain anymore, it was a promise renewed. A place where people like Lila and Sam could rise, where effort mattered, where every burger flipped was a step toward something bigger. Julian had started with a dream in a food truck. Now, he'd built a legacy worth keeping. And as the sun dipped low, casting gold across the city, he knew he'd never let it slip away again.